Hi, welcome back. So this is the third and final video for going from simple blues to Parker blues, and in the previous two videos we have looked at the basic chord progression for a 12-bar blues sequence. So we're just looking at 3-chord blues. This is something that happens all the time. You should be really familiar with it. That's the groundwork that you need to do. It's the foundation for everything. So if you're not quite sure of that, go back to video 1, make sure you're really solid with that before we move on. Video 2 was looking at more of a jazz blues, so what jazz musicians tend to do to the blues progression, so they added chords into it. So I've still got this up on here. From last time, this is kind of what we were looking at, how you can have 2-5-1 progression thrown in there, how you can preempt different chords. So there's a very big movement here. So in bar 5 we went to chord number 4, so F7, and to preempt a target chord we had a 2-5 progression which led into that. So hopefully that all sort of makes sense. We also had this sort of, we know about the 2-5-1 here. We also talked about how this can, I'm going to get rid of that just to simplify things. We actually preempted the preempting chords, if you like. So you can actually set up a movement, so 2-5-1, we're going back to C here, but you can set up the 2-5 with a preceding 2-5. Okay, so you know that's pretty full on. And now we're going to go even further down the rabbit hole, and we're going to talk about a Parker blues. I call it a Parker blues. A lot of people call it a bird blues, or I've heard it called, I think it's called like a countdown blues or a clockwork blues, something like that, because it follows a little sort of descending pattern. I don't tend to use that phrase, but I know it's been called that. Sometimes called New York blues changes, so it's all the same thing, but we're talking about Parker blues or bird blues. And Charlie Parker was one of the pioneers of the bebop era, and so this is moving from the 1930s into the 1940s. And the whole thing about bebop was that you started to up the tempo. You also started to add lots and lots more chords to progressions that you were used to. So we've already realized that this blues evolution, jazz musicians of the 1930s were adding stuff like this, and now Charlie Parker comes along with Dizzy Gillespie and others and starts to throw in even more chords. So we're going to go through all of these chords and just work out what it is you can do to it, and I'm going to tell you how it all works and hopefully give you some ideas about how to practice it. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about then, and this is something I didn't do in the previous video just to make it a little bit more accessible, perhaps a little bit easier, but we're going to talk about something that happens at the end. Now this you could definitely do in the last 2 bars of the previous video, so in the jazz blues it's definitely done, but I just want to talk about it on this video because it's a little bit more complicated. So what we're going to do is to do a progression which is called a turnaround. Now a turnaround is a great device that will actually be, it would be a sequence of chords which will find its way back to home. Okay, so we're going to use a sequence of chords which will get you back to home, which is actually in bar number 1. Now a turnaround it's often used for this purpose, but sometimes it's used as a sort of a progression in itself. So the whole idea of the turnaround is that it can just loop, it can turn around over each other. The chord sequence can just loop around. Sometimes we call this a vamp. So you often find that a turnaround is used as a vamp either at the beginning or the end of a piece. But we're going to talk about it turning around back into chord 1, back into bar 1. Okay, so we've realized that we've got a 2-5-1 progression here, but at the moment these 2 bars are a little bit sparse. So we're going to use chord 1 here. We're actually going to go to chord 6 here, and then our good old 2-5-1 progression we can stick in the last bar. So we get D minor 7 and G7. So now we've got a chord sequence here of 1, 6, 2 and 5. Okay, so this is a very traditional form of turnaround. I'm going to show you a couple of little variations here, not to get too complicated, but this 6 chord, as we've seen here, and this is kind of talking about chord 6 really in a way in this bar, it can be often be replaced with, instead of a minor 7 you can use a dominant 7. So this is a very, very common thing. You can get rid of that minor. And the great thing about that, as we found in this bar, is it gives you that C sharp. So in this case we're in the key of C. Otherwise, if we just had that as a minor, it would be a normal C. So it gives you that extra note, which is moving away from the C major territory, which is kind of what we want if you want to get a more chromatic jazz sound. So we often replace this with A7, A dominant 7 instead of A minor 7. So that's number 1. We also very often replace this chord and we often replace it with 3. So we're actually going to do E minor 7, A7. So it actually matches really nicely with what we've got here. So preempting this 2-5 here. So the turnaround in itself, 3, 6, 2, 5. This is another really common variation of it. So there we have it. We've got a turnaround at the end. So that's the first thing we're going to do. The next thing we're going to do, and this is just Charlie Parker, just how his mind was working. We're going to actually change this chord here to a major 7. Now this is quite unusual in the blues, but bebop musicians kind of like to work with the 2-5-1 progression as it was, and Charlie Parker particularly changed a lot of dominant chords into major 7th chords. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so it actually puts us more grounded. Actually, he's sort of got rid of that sort of tension in the first bar. He's actually made it more solid. Okay, so that's what we've got there. And now we're going to work on these 2 bars here. So what we've discovered is that we can preempt this big change here. This is a really kind of important change, bar 5. So that's a massively important target chord there. And we know that we can preempt that with a 2-5 progression. Now, we also know that we can preempt the preempting chords. Okay, so we can do exactly the same in this one here. So I find this best to work backwards. Now we're trying to preempt this chord here, and anytime you preempt it, you're trying to think of chord 5 going to this. So have a think about what the 5 chord of G would be, and you get D7. And if you think of the 2 chord of G, it would be A minor 7. So there we go, we've got another bar of kind of moving towards this target chord. The next one we can do is this one here. And the common variation for this one is this here. So we've got B minor 7, flat 5, E7 going into A minor. Now we've talked a little bit about this. If you're preempting a minor chord, that the 2 and the 5 can be a little bit different. The reason why we don't do it on this one, even though that's preempting a minor chord, is because really this B minor 7 flat 5 chord is a little bit safer in the key of C. So the flat 5 will turn this from being an F sharp into the 5th would be an F sharp, and you flattening it to an F natural, which kind of fits a little bit nicer in the whole scheme of things. Okay, so that's what he's done. So he started with a resolved, much more resolved, safer major 7 chord. He's then preempting this big change, and he's doing it like from bar 2. He's going right the way to this chord here, and that's all that's doing, is trying to get to there. Now that kind of leaves us with this second line, and this is where it gets a little bit more difficult. From here, what he's trying to do is drop down chromatically. I'm going to get rid of these. So this is just his idea of a variation of it. He's trying to go down from E flat, D, D flat. So from the E flat, it's dropping down chromatically. And there are some, I'm not going to go into this too much, I'm hopefully going to do another video of this. You could consider these to be tritone substitutions. So I'm going to just mention that, but I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail about it. A tritone substitution, we've actually already looked at the interval of a tritone on the blues scale on the first video, which was the interval in this case from C to F sharp. So we're talking about 3 tones. And a tritone substitution is something that you can do if you want to replace or substitute a chord or even a chord sequence. So let's take this as an example here. D flat, if you have a little think about and the interval of a tritone away from D flat would be, you can count it up with me. So D flat would be 1, E flat would be, sorry, D flat would be your starting point, E flat would be 1 tone, F would be your next tone, and up again, the 3rd tone would be G. So we've got a tritone substitution here of the chord G. Now G, you know to be chord 5. I mean, that's really, really common in the key of C. So what Charlie Parker's done is he's kind of thought about how to get back to the key of C. And all this is doing is kind of preempting where we're going, which is a very, very long-winded way of getting back to this target chord here. So really, kind of left with 2 target chords that are not changed. I know you've changed the type of chord, but it's still a C chord. So all of this is long-winded way of getting all the way back to the target chord. Okay, it's pretty full on. But so what he does, rather than just playing an E flat chord here, of course he's going to do a 2-5 progression. So let's work backwards. Here we're going to have a 2-5 in D flat major. So we're going to have E flat minor 7, A flat 7. Here we're going to have a 2-5 in the key of D. So this is E minor 7, A7. And here we've got one in the key of E flat. There we go. So that's it. That is it. It's pretty intense, and you can see, you know, apart from the target chords and maybe these 2 at the end, you're changing 2 chords per bar, and at tempo this can give you that sound. So people often come to me and say, I want to sound like Charlie Parker. I remember teaching one guy, he said, I just want to sound like Charlie Parker. I was thinking, okay. Now, there's a whole load of stuff that goes with that. And you have to go through this process and build up your foundations, which is why I've done videos in this way. So, you know, I'm jumping massively from one step to another, but hoping it's going to be either, you know, quite easy to understand, or that you can just see what's happening here. And when I first learnt about this, and I listened to Charlie Parker for a long time, and I always thought it was just magic. You know, I thought that what he was doing was just impossible, and I'd had no clue about what he was doing at all. Harmonically, melodically, it was all a big mystery. It was magic to me. But now I've actually worked out what was happening, and the magic's kind of still there, because he's very, very clever with what he does, and he's technically, you know, the way he moves around it is beautiful. But it's kind of become a little bit more clear. I can actually see and think about what it is that he's doing. So basically, he works with the arpeggios of each of these chords, and then just slightly elaborates the arpeggio and works around the arpeggio. So it just gives you that massive sense of harmonic movement. So you can do loads of different things here. You know, imagine going from C major 7, so C, E, G, B, then we've got B, D, F, A, E, G sharp, B and D. You know, you've immediately unlocked some different notes there. It's not going to sound like your normal blues, and that's really the point. You know, that's what Charlie Parker was about. He was playing a blues, but he was not trying to make it sound like a Memphis blues or a Chicago blues. It was his own idea, this sort of bebop blues, bird blues. This here, where he's got this sort of descending line going through tritone substitutions. All of the notes you can access on this line are fantastic. You know, you've got F, A, C, E flat, F, A flat, C, E flat, B flat, D, F, A flat, E, G, B, D, A, C sharp, E, G, E flat, G flat, B flat, D flat, A flat, C, E flat, G flat. How on earth would you get those just playing the simple blues? I mean, unless you just said, well, you can play any note, any chromatic note, then yes, that would be the same sort of approach. But you can see here that it's actually, the reason why it sounds good and it makes sense is because it's got some structure to it. It's got some theory to it. So yes, you can play any note over a blues and it might sound okay, but it might sound horrendous as well. So if you follow this progression here, you can actually get all of those notes and it will sound really, really good. So this is what I suggest you do with this. It's kind of similar to the second video, just arpeggiating the chords, but you should have loads of fun just playing, or perhaps even pulling your hair out, I'm not sure, but fun, let's call it fun. Going through every single arpeggio and working out what it is first of all, and then playing the arpeggio, and then see if you can work slowly through it all and try and put it together into some sort of improvised arpeggiated solo. And you know, I really enjoy doing that sort of stuff, so I hope you do too.